Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first part of A Christmas Carol by Mr. Charles Dickens, told by Bea the Storyteller. The story is set in 1843, and you know what? Christmas was nearly dead then. There had been a very much slowing down on celebrations, and people were still going to Mass, but the whole fabulous Christmas spirit that we love so much did not exist then. And a young writer who was quite unknown, called Mr. Charles Dickens, he wrote this story I'm just about to tell you. Not only did he write this story, but he told it the way I am telling it to you. He toured America with this story. He toured the UK and would tell it to packed audiences. He was a terribly good actor. So I'm going to do my best here. And welcome to London, 1843. One of the things you need to know about London in 1843 is that it was incredibly foggy. And I did not know what the London fog felt like, because obviously it was a long time ago until I moved to Ireland. I live next to a lovely little town where people mostly heat themselves with coal or peat, turf as they call it here. And the fog during cold winter, damp winter nights is unbelievable, and it just feels like the smog, the very dense fog that they had in London in those days. The other thing you need to know, absolutely know, and Mr. Dickens is very adamant about it, is that Jacob Marley was dead as a doornail, he says. So if there are any suspicions of Mr. Marley having been bumped off by anyone, I understand there's two young girls in New Zealand who think that maybe there was crime committed. There was no crime committed, little girls, in New Zealand. I'm telling you there wasn't. He died because he was a miserable old man. And the only person at his funeral was his partner, whose name was Ebenezer Scrooge. And they called themselves accountants. They were not accountants at all. They were moneylenders, nasty, grabbing, unpleasant moneylenders. I'm sure there's some nice moneylenders, but they were not nice ones, I am telling you. So, Marley was dead, and that was like 3 years ago. Christmas Eve, he died, and it was another Christmas Eve, and Mr. Scrooge, was in his office with his clerk, whose name was Bob Cratchit. Bob Cratchit was like a long bean, and he had clothes that were so old that they were black originally, but they turned a sort of strange black-green, and he had a very long muffler that used to cover most of his face because it was freezing cold in Mr. Scrooge's office. Because you see, not only was he a money lender, but he was a miser as well. He liked money too much. So imagine it's Christmas Eve, and outside in the streets there is a feeling, it's foggy, like in the streets of the town near I live. And it's so foggy, and it's cold and damp, and there's snow in the air. There's that yellowness about things that invoke snow in the air, but people are busy. There's shopping. Lots of people have got half day off. All the people who work in the office, we're in the city of London, don't forget. And there's a lot of bustle and carols singing, and all is very lovely. But not in Mr. Scrooge's office, where misery, damp and cold reign. When there's a rat-a-tat at the door, and bursts in his nephew, whose name is Fred. No, Fred is a bank clerk, and he's a jolly fellow, really. He's not very rich or anything, but he's a jolly sort of guy. And he goes towards Scrooge and says, "Hello, Scrooge! Hello, Uncle Scrooge! Happy Christmas!" And Scrooge says, "Bah, Christmas, you're horrible. Just what you doing here? What do you want?" And Fred says, "I don't want anything, Uncle. I just want to wish you a Merry Christmas, and I want to tell you that you are very welcome to come and have your Christmas dinner with us tomorrow. We are starting at 2:00, so please be with us, and we'll be delighted to welcome you in our house." I'm not going to any Christmas. Don't be ridiculous. I'll be working all day on Christmas Day like I usually do. Oh, never mind, Uncle. And off goes Fred, like a breath of fresh air he was. And Bob Cratchit puts his pen down and he looks inquiringly at Mr. Scrooge. Mr. Scrooge says, "What?" "I believe the clock has just chimed 7, says Bob Cratchit. "And," said Mrs. "Well, it's time for me to go home, sir." "Oh," said Scrooge, "and I expect you'll be wanting Christmas Day off as well." "Well, it is customary," says Bob. "Well, I suppose you might as well be extra early on Boxing Day, will you? Extra early. I don't like giving money for anything." And Bob Cratchit joyfully wraps himself more in his scarf and off he goes. And Scrooge, he works another hour, but it's getting really cold and damp. And he goes and he closes his office door, makes his way to the restaurant he always eats at. He has some mutton. Well, there's some greasy bits floating on top of the very thin stew. Lots of potatoes, not terribly well cooked either. Anyway, he eats that and then he goes home. And he lives in a big house in the city of London that used to belong to a Dutch merchant that he managed to ruin. And he took the house as payment of his debts. And it's falling apart because it's not like Scrooge to start looking after things, is it? And on the door of the house, this big door, it looks very impressive. There's a huge doorknob, huge, that size, the shape of a lion's head. And normally it would be beautifully clean and bright, but of course it's all tarnished and sort of verdigris. But as Scrooge looks at the door and it's like, oh my God, this is not the lion's head. He sees the head of Marley, the old man that died 3 years ago, his partner. And it's like, rubs his eyes and says, "Oh, dear God, what's wrong with me? I've eaten far too much of that stew," he thinks to himself. And he pushes the very big key into the door and locks it. And up he goes upstairs into his bedroom. And there's a meagre fire there. And he puts his dressing gown on and then he sits there. And he doesn't know quite what to do. It feels very strange. Everything is very quiet and very cold and very odd indeed when suddenly the window burst open. There's a storm like no other storm ever before. And in tumbles a body which seemed to be surrounded by chains and strong boxes. And it makes a terrible noise and shakes itself and turns out to be Jacob Marley. "Jacob Marley," says Ebenezer Scrooge, "what are you doing here?" Oh, you'll never stop wailing," says Ebenezer Scrooge. "Just stop right now. What are you doing here?" Oh, you'll never hear the last of it. You have no idea." And Marley gathers all these chains around his person. And he's like, "You have no idea how bad this is. I am in hell." "In hell," says Ebenezer Scrooge. "Why would you be in hell? You are one of the kindest men I know. You're maybe not kind, but just men I know. You've always lived a very prudent life." "Oh, don't tell me about the prudent life," says Jacob Marley. No, I had got it all wrong. "But anyway, what are you doing here? Could you please close the window?" says Scrooge. "Never mind the window. I've come to warn you, you idiot." "What?" says Ebenezer Scrooge. "Warn me about what?" "You are doomed if you do not change your ways. I'm going to send you 3 ghosts. The ghosts of Christmas past, the ghost of Christmas present, and the ghost of Christmas future. And they will teach you a lesson. I have been granting a chance to ask you to mend your ways." "I have done nothing wrong," says Ebenezer Scrooge. "I live a modest life. I am a good man. I am very prudent and careful with my money. What are you talking about?" "Never mind." And he just flies off the chimney with the chains and the strong boxes, and there's loads and loads of soot falling. And the window closes. Ebenezer Scrooge shakes himself and looks around, and everything looks exactly the same. And he thinks to himself, oh dear, I don't think I should have eaten that stew tonight. I've got stomachache, haven't I? It was just a bad dream. And he goes to bed. He goes to bed. He puts all the curtains round his bed. Like in the olden days, they used to have curtains around the bed to make themselves warmer. And he puts his hat on. And he goes to sleep. And then suddenly, he wakes up. Like you wake up in the middle of the night when there's a strange noise, but you don't know what the noise is. And he wakes up. And underneath the curtains of his bed, he sees a strange, strange light. And he thinks, oh, I wonder what that is. And he peers through the curtains of his bed. And there he is there, a ghost. A lovely, well, he's not quite sure whether it's a boy or a girl, but it's white and glows slightly. And the ghost says, come with me. I can't go outside. I'm not wet. I'm not dry. And the next thing I know, Scrooge is flying over London. His hand is held by the hand of Christmas past. They're flying over the countryside. Papa, please, can we ask Ebenezer to home for Christmas? Please, Papa. Please, Papa. Fanny, be quiet. You know that I will not have him in the house. He's not a good boy. That's not true, Papa. He's a lovely boy. It isn't his fault that Mama died when he was born. It really isn't, Papa. Papa, please. You see, Fanny, who was Ebenezer Scrooge's sister, had caught a bad cold that winter, and she was still coughing. And she was using it for all she was worth, the minx, because she did love her brother, and she thought he was such a good boy, and she did not like it at all that he was, sadly, in some horrible boarding school all on his own at the age of 6. And she knew that he was going to spend Christmas all on his own with the housekeeper, and he would be miserable. And she pleaded, Papa, please, that eventually Scrooge's father said, oh, all right, just go and get him. And she went. And she went with their governess, and they took the carriage, and they were not poor people, you know, and they got to the door of the boarding school, and they banged on the door again, and the housekeeper was overjoyed to see them, to be fair, because she wanted to have time off at Christmas too. And there was such rejoicing when Ebenezer found his sister, and that the sister had decided to take him away. And it was such a lovely Christmas. It was the best Christmas ever, Fanny always said. And then Fanny never really got over the flu. Not really. But that's another story. And, Scrooge's father decided to keep him home after all, and he stayed home. And then Scrooge, flying over the countryside, found himself back in London, in the city of London, and he looked down and, come along, Mr. Fezziwig. Mr. Fezziwig, are you ready yet? Mr. Fezziwig, what are you doing? Are you clearing up yet? Tell those boys, tell those boys to stop. Ebenezer, put your pen down. It's Christmas Eve. It's time for the party. Now, Mrs. Fezziwig was as round as she was tall, or as wide as she was tall, and she favoured very loud fabrics. Like currently she was wearing a yellow and black madras sort of thing, with lots of flounces and flowers in her hair, and she had a false front as well, which was all curly and red. And she was just the jolliest person ever. She was not in the first flush of youth, but oh my God, she was always happy with Mrs. Fezziwig. She was running around, tidying up everything, and the boys were made to lay the table, and everybody was invited to the Fezziwigs' Christmas Eve party. And it was the best party ever that year because you see, she came. Ebenezer was courting. He was a young clerk by then, and he was just so hardworking, and he was in love. Now, we don't know what her name was because Charles Dickens never tells us. What shall we call her? I don't know. Mary? Mary is a good name. Yes, we'll call her Mary. And Mary and Ebenezer danced all night. And Mrs. Fezziwig was so excited. She was like, oh my God, there's going to be a wedding. Mr. Fezziwig, I know there's going to be a wedding. But then you see, we're looking somewhere else now. And Scrooge doesn't want to go there. He's pleading with the ghost of Christmas past. Please don't take me there. Please, I don't really want to be there. Suddenly, he's sobered up. And the ghost of Christmas past says, you must come with me. And they go on top of Primrose Hill. I don't know if you've ever been on top of Primrose Hill in London, but it's beautiful. You can see the whole of the town. There's a bench there. I've sat on it often enough. And on that bench, there's Mary and Scrooge. And Mary says, I need to talk to you, my dear. And Scrooge says, yes, my dear. I am sorry, my dear, but you've changed too much. I can no longer be engaged with you. I would like to give you the ring back. And Scrooge says, why? What are you talking about? I haven't changed. Why are you saying I've changed? I haven't changed at all. Yes, you have, says Mary. You have found another lover. I have not. I've been faithful like it. No, says Mary. You've fallen in love with money. You keep pushing our wedding date back. You keep telling me we haven't saved enough. We have plenty of money and we loved each other. I don't want a grand house. I just want to be happy, and I'm sorry, my lovely, but this is not going to be with you. I love you dearly, but you love money more than you love me. And she gives him the ring, and he puts it's in his hand now, and she walks away. As you do, you're hoping the person is going to call you back, don't you? But alas, Scrooge does not call Mary back. To his great shame, as he's watching the scene reenacted again, he remembered as the only thing that he could think at the time was how much the ring would fetch on the open market. And by that point, if you had been able to see what was going on, there's a very old man in his nightshirt, shaking a young man, the young man he once was, by the shoulders, and saying to him, call her back, you fool! Call her back! Call her back! And then, nothing. Nothing. Because Scrooge is back in his bed. And this is the end of the first act of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. The second act will be tomorrow on my Facebook page, Bea the Storyteller. Thank you for listening.